United States. Public transport.
Public transport.
In a jam.
In a jam.
Angelinos are happy to pay for public transport, but loath to use it.
Angelinos are happy to pay for public transport, but loath to use it.
The Expo Line, a light railway which connects the city of Santa Monica to downtown Los Angeles, is a marvel.
The Expo Line, a light railway that which connects the city of Santa Monica to downtown Los Angeles, is a marvel.
For decades, Angelinos traveling to and from the beach had to sit in traffic on Interstate 10.
For decades, Angelinos traveling to and from the beach had to sit in traffic on Interstate 10.
Since 2012, when the line opened, repurposing a long-closed Pacific Electric rail line, they've been able to catch a sleek train instead.
Since 2012, when the new line opened, repurposing a long-closed Pacific Electric rail line, they have been able to catch a sleek train instead.
On board, Josh, clutching a smart yellow bicycle, says that thanks to the line, he has managed to avoid buying a car since moving back to the city from New York 3 years ago.
Josh, clutching a smart yellow bike, says that thanks to the line, he has managed to avoid buying a car since moving back to the city from New York 3 years ago.
Instead, he commutes by bike and train to his tech firm office each day.
Instead, he commutes by bike and train to his tech firm office each day.
Such stories delight urbanists.
Such stories delight urbanists.
Who want to make LA less dependent on the car.
Such stories delight urbanists who want to make LA less dependent on the car.
The city is trying hard to throw off its reputation.
The city is trying hard to throw off its reputation. The city is trying hard to throw off its reputation.
As an automotive city.
The city is trying hard to throw off its reputation as an automotive city.
In 2016, 71% of voters in Los Angeles County.
In 2016, 71% of voters in Los Angeles County. In 2016, 71 voters in Los Angeles County
approved Measure M.
Approved Measure M.
A ballot initiative which imposed a sales tax to fund public transport.
A ballot initiative which imposed the sales tax to fund public transport. A ballot initiative which imposed the sales tax to fund the public transport. In 2016, 71 voters of Los Angeles County approved the Measure M, a ballot initiative which imposed the sales tax to fund the public transport.
That and older taxes mean for every dollar they spend.
That and all the taxes mean for every dollar they spend. That and all the taxes mean for every dollar they spend.
People in the Los Angeles urban area now contribute 2 cents to public transport.
That and all the taxes mean for every dollar they spend. People in the Los Angeles urban area contribute 2 cents to public transport.
Several new rail lines are planned.
Several new rail lines are planned.
Last year, the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, announced that he wants to reduce the number of car trips there. By half over the next 30 years.
30 years. By half of the next 30 years. Last year, the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, announced that he wants to reduce the number of car trips there by half over the next 30 years.
Yet much more common than people like Josh
Yet much more common than people like Josh
are people like Debbie,
are people like Debbie,
22-year-old pharmacy worker.
a 22-year-old pharmacy worker. But much more common people like Josh, much more common than people like Josh is people like Debbie, a 22-year-old pharmacy worker.
Standing waiting for a bus in El Monte,
Standing waiting for a bus in El Monte. Standing waiting for a bus in El Monte,
a city in the east of the sprawl,
a city in the east of the sprawl.
she looks sniffily around at her surroundings.
She looks sniffily around at her surroundings. Standing waiting for a bus in El Monte, a city in the east of the sprawl, she looks sniffily around at her surroundings.
Today her car has broken down.
Today her car has broken down.
Otherwise, she would be in it.
Today her car has broken down. Otherwise, she would be in it.
Driving is just so much easier, she says.
Driving is just so much easier, she says.
Even as its budget has expanded,
Even as its budget has expanded,
the number of people actually using public transport in LA
the number of people actually using public transport in LA
has collapsed.
has collapsed. Even as its budget has expanded, the number of people actually using public transport in LA has collapsed.
Total ridership is down almost a quarter since 2013.
Total ridership is down almost a quarter since 2013. Total ridership is down almost a quarter since 2013.
Three in four Angelinos travel to work on their own in a car.
3 in 4 Angelinos travel to work on their own in a car. 3 to 4 Angelinos travel to work on their own in a car.
The highest figure ever.
The highest figure ever. 3 in 4 Angelinos travel to work on their own in a car. The highest figure ever.
Half a century ago, Rena Banham, a British architectural critic,
a British architecture critic,
mocked urban planners who wanted to force LA to re-adopt public transport.
mocked urban planners who wanted to force LA to re-adopt public transport. Half a century ago, Rena Banham, a British architecture critic, mocked the urban planners who wanted to force LA to re-adopt public transport.
It will not be easy to persuade Angelinos
It will not be easy to persuade Angelinos.
to climb into whatever colored rolling stock
To climb into whatever colored the rolling stocks. The
new dream system offers.
The new dream system offers. It will not be easy to persuade the Angelinos to climb into whatever colored the rolling stocks the new system offers.
he wrote. Some fear he may be proved right.
Some fear he may be proved right. Some fear he may be proved right.
It seems to be easier to persuade Angelenos to pay for public transport.
It seems to be easier to persuade Angelenos to pay for public transport. It seems to be easier to persuade Angelenos to pay for public transport
Than to get them to use it.
than to get them to use it, than to get them to use it, than to get them to use it. Some fear he may be proved right. It seems to be easier to persuade Angelenos to pay for public transport than get them to use it.
According to Michael Manville, a professor at UCLA's Institute of Transportation Studies,
According to Michael Manville, a professor at UCLA's Institute of Transportation Studies,
the driving factor behind the decline
the driving factor behind the decline
is that public transport in LA is mostly a safety net for the poor.
is that public transport in LA is mostly a safety net for the poor. Is that public transport in LA is mostly a safety net for the poor,
Not a service for most people.
not a service for most people. Not a service for most people. According to Michael Manville, a professor at UCLA's Institute of Transportation Studies, the driving factor behind the decline is that public transport in LA is mostly a safety net for the poor, not a service for most people.
In a typical year,
In a typical year,
the average person in Southern California
the average person in Southern California
takes 36 bus or train trips.
takes 36 bus or train trips. In a typical year, the average person in Southern California takes 36 bus or train trips.
But most people take none at all.
But most people take none at all. But most people take none at all. But most people take none at all.
And in recent years,
And in recent years,
as subprime credit has proliferated
as subprime credit has proliferated,
and wages have risen,
and wages have risen,
poor people in the city have acquired cars.
poor people in the city have acquired cars. And in recent years, as subprime credit has proliferated and wages have risen, poor people have acquired cars.
The proportion of households without access to a car
The proportion of households without access to a car
fell from 10% in 2000
fell from 10% in 2000
to 7% in 2015.
to 7% in 2015. The proportion of households without access to a car fell from 10% in 2000 to 7% in 2015.
Among immigrants, the fall was even sharper,
Among immigrants, the fall was even sharper.
from 14% to 8%.
From 14% to 8%. Among immigrants, the fall was even sharper. Even from 14% to 8%.
For a while, the opening of new rail lines
For a while, the opening of new rail lines.
balanced out falling use of buses,
Balanced out falling use of buses.
but no longer.
But no longer. For a while, the opening of new rail lines balanced out falling use of buses. But no longer.
According to Mr. Manville,
According to Mr. Manville,
providing public transport options
providing public transport options
is not enough to persuade people to get out of their cars.
It's not enough to persuade the people to get out of their cars. According to Mr. Manville, providing public transport options is not enough to persuade the people get out of their cars.
Trains and buses must be almost as fast and convenient
Trains and buses must be almost as convenient, fast and convenient
as driving. Trains and buses must be almost as
must be almost as
fast and convenient as driving.
fast and convenient as driving. Fast and convenient. Trains and buses must be almost as convenient and fast and convenient as driving.
In sprawling Los Angeles,
In sprawling Los Angeles,
with its extensive freeway system,
with its extensive freeway system,
even the almost permanent traffic jams
even the almost permanent traffic jams,
do not slow people down to the speed of buses.
do not slow people down to the speed of buses. Do not slow people down to the speed of buses. In sprawling Los Angeles with its extensive freeway system, even the most permanent traffic jams, even the almost permanent traffic jams do not slow people down to the speed of buses.
With over 100 square miles of parking,
With over 100 square miles of parking,
over 4 Manhattans,
over four Manhattans,
there is usually somewhere to leave the car.
there's usually somewhere to leave their car. With the over 100 square miles of parking, over four Manhattans, there's usually somewhere to leave their car.
What can be done to turn things round?
What can be done to turn things around?
Jessica Meany, who runs a charity which lobbies for transport for poor to turn things round. Jessica Meany, who runs a charity which lobbies for transport for poorer people, says that the city's planners have often been too romantic.
Says that the city's planners have often been too romantic. Says that the city's planners have often been too romantic.
Prioritizing grand new rail lines.
Prioritizing grand new rail lines.
And trying to attract freewheeling yuppies.
According Jessica Meany, who runs a charity which lobbies for transport for poor people, says that the city's planners have often been too romantic, prioritizing the railway system, grand new rail lines, and trying to attract freewheeling yuppies.
Meanwhile, the needs of poorer people,
who
mostly use buses, have been neglected.
Meanwhile, the needs of poor people who mostly use buses have been neglected.
She notes several simple things that need improvement. Pavements around bus routes.
Pavements around the bus routes
should be less dangerous.
Pavements around the bus routes should be less dangerous.
So people do not feel scared of walking to the stop.
So people do not feel scared of walking to the stop. Pavements around the bus routes should be less dangerous. So people do not feel scared of walking to the stop.
Rail stations need toilets and baby changing stations.
Rail stations need the toilets and baby changing stations. Rail stations need toilets and baby changing stations.
So that people with children or without are not caught short.
Rail stations need toilets and baby changing stations so that people with children or without are not caught short.
Police officers patrolling lines
police officers patrolling lines, police officers patrolling lines, police officers patrolling lines
could be less aggressive towards young men.
could be less aggressive towards young men, could be less aggressive towards young men. And police officers patrolling lines could be less aggressive towards young men.
Modest changes are already underway.
Modest changes are already underway. Modest changes are already underway.
Last month, the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority,
Okay, last month the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority,
which manages most public transport in the LA urban area,
which manages most public transport in the LA urban area,
announced that it will update its bus routes,
announced that it'll update its bus routes. Announced that it'll update its bus routes,
which have been mostly unchanged for 30 years.
which have mostly been unchanged for 30 years. Which have been mostly unchanged for 30 years. Last month, the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which manages most public transport in the LA urban area, announced that it'll update its bus routes, which have been mostly unchanged for 30 years.
Joshua Shank, the agency's chief innovation officer,
Joshua Shank, the agency's chief innovation officer,
explains how a study of people's traveling habits
explains how a study of the people's traveling habits
found that buses were particularly bad for short journeys,
found that buses are particularly bad for short journeys.
out of normal commuting hours.
Out of normal commuting hours.
Taking a child to a doctor, for example,
Taking a child to a doctor, for example. Joshua Shank, the agency's chief innovation officer, explains how a study of people's traveling habits, found that buses are particularly bad for short journeys out of normal commuting hours. Taking a baby to a doctor, for example.
make those easier, and some two-car families might drop one.
Make some easier, and some two-car families might drop one. Make those easier, and some two-car families might drop one.
Yet such tweaks will probably not be enough.
But such tweaks not be probably not such tweaks will probably not enough. But such tweaks will probably not be enough. Will probably not be enough
To lessen LA's legendary traffic jams.
to lessen LA's legendary traffic jams. Yet such tweaks will probably not be enough to lessen LA's legendary traffic jams.
And as traffic worsens,
As traffic worsens,
it creates a downward spiral.
it creates a downward spiral.
As buses slow down even more,
As buses slow down even more,
and people switch to cars.
and people switch to cars, and as traffic worsens, it creates a downward spiral. As buses slow down even more, and people switch to cars.
Mr. Shank says the city will eventually need some sort of congestion pricing.
Mr. Sheng says the city will eventually need some sort of congestion pricing. Mr. Sheng says the city will eventually need some sort of congestion pricing.
The roads will never accommodate the demand,
The roads will never accommodate the demands.
as long as the price is zero, he says.
As long as the price is zero, he says. The roads will never accommodate the demand. As long as the price is zero, he says.
A pilot is already being planned.
A pilot is already being planned. A pilot is already being planned.
That will be controversial, however.
That will be controversial, however. That will be controversial, however.
Even removing a single lane of traffic
Even removing a single lane of traffic. Even removing a single lane of traffic
to create a dedicated bus lane
to create a dedicated bus lane. To create a dedicated bus lane
can cause a storm of anger.
can cause a storm of anger. Can cause a storm of anger. Even removing a single lane of traffic to create a dedicated bus lane can cause a storm of anger.
For other American cities,
For other American cities,
or at least those which look a little like LA,
or at least those which look a little like LA, or at least those which look a little like LA,
all this ought to be worrying.
all this ought to be worrying. All this ought to be worrying.
All this ought to be worrying.
All this ought to be worrying. All this ought to be worrying. For most American cities and or at least cities which look which look a little like LA, all this ought to be worrying.
Among the fastest growing parts of America,
Among the fastest growing parts of America, are
Sunbelt cities such as Houston, Atlanta, and Phoenix.
are Sunbelt cities such as Houston, Atlanta, and Phoenix. Among the fastest growing parts of America are Sunbelt cities such as Houston, Atlanta, and Phoenix.
Such places also tend to have liberal leaders.
Such places tend to have liberal leaders. Such places also tend to have liberal leaders
Who want to move away from space-hogging, polluting cars.
who want to move away from space-hogging, polluting cars. Such places also tend to have liberal leaders who want to move away from space-hogging, polluting cars.
Yet none of those cities have anywhere near the resources
But none of the cities have anywhere near the resources. But none of the cities have anywhere near the resources.
LA has put into public transport
LA has put into public transport
to such little effect.
to such little effect. But none of the cities have anywhere near the resources LA has put into public resources, and to such a little effect.
Money is important,
Money is important.
but to get people out of their cars,
But to get people out of their cars, their cars,
it will take bravery too.
it'll take bravery too. Money is important, but to get people out of their cars, it will take bravery too.